They can pull off the historic three-peat, of course. How about the Eagles? There's Jalen Hurts and company. They're hoping to stand in the way of that three-peat. They're also in New Orleans. Now, more to come on the Super Bowl throughout the next 2 hours here on NFL Live. But we start with a major breaking news story out of Cleveland where an all-pro wants out. Adam Schefter, what's going on?
Well, Laura, Myles Garrett has requested a trade from the Cleveland Browns. The reigning Defensive Player of the Year wants to go play for a Super Bowl contender. And clearly he doesn't believe that that's going to be the case in Cleveland. Now, the Browns have been very clear about the fact that they are not interested in trading Myles Garrett. But that was also before he issued a very public trade request to be dealt away from Cleveland. And so now there's a little bit of a standoff. And I think it depends on how far Myles Garrett is willing to push this. Clearly, Cleveland will come to him, will be interested in redoing his contract. But even if you trade Myles Garrett, there's a cap charge for a team that's already in a challenging cap situation. So there's a lot of complexities. Just because he asked for a trade today doesn't ultimately mean that he will be traded. There are many chapters to this story still to be written. But Myles Garrett, at the very least, has made it known now that he would like to be sent out of Cleveland, which I also know you know is not very surprising.
Yeah, it's very valuable context. Adam with us throughout the next 2 hours and a lot more to get to here. We'll talk about exactly what this means for the Browns and more. But first, let's go back to Myles Garrett's end of the season press conference that happened back in January.
Is this in many ways a tougher season than even your rookie season when you kind of think of everything and the expectation and where this organization is going to come since, 2017 to now?
It's probably a more disappointing season. Yeah, because what we expected of ourselves, what we had built year before. So that's how I take it.
All right, Adam, of course, with us for the rest of the show. You see RC, you see Marcus and Mina, and there's a lot to get to with this. Marcus, let's start with you. What do you make of the trade demand from Garrett?
It makes sense. I don't think the Cleveland Browns have a clear direction. And no matter how you couch it, a lot of things that are transpiring in Cleveland are a reverberation of the contract that they decided to give to Deshaun Watson. It puts you in flux as far as a lot of guys go. But this is more about frustration with Myles Garrett of having to deal with the up and down situation that's been going on in Cleveland. And the bottom line is when you don't get the quarterback position right or you don't have the right infrastructure for a quarterback, these guys start looking around and they start determining, yeah, we really can't win here. And Boogie, I know that so that's my reaction to the Cleveland part. But I'll say this, the Washington Commanders should be on the phone right now trying to figure out how to get Myles Garrett to the D.C. area because that team has a lot of cap space. They're right. And Dan Quinn is the defensive coordinator. Myles Garrett might have 30 sacks if he ends up in Washington.
Yeah, he's looking for that individual production as well as winning. That's part of what his statement said. But, Mina, it's easy to say, to Marcus's points, any team would want Garrett on their roster. Yeah. But who realistically can make it happen in your mind?
Well, there's complexity to this, Laura. Adam talked about the contract and the amount of money that would hit the Cleveland Browns books. It actually wouldn't be prohibitively expensive for really many acquiring teams, but you would trade for him likely with the awareness that you're going to have to give him a big contract extension. He has a couple years left on his deal. Marcus singled out the team that I think is on everybody's minds right now because of the cap space and in terms of the Washington Commanders, and also because they fit Myles Garrett's parameters. They are a contender. So along those lines, I look at the teams that made it deep into the playoffs. Aside from, of course, the Ravens, who are a divisional competitor, I think teams like the Bills and the Lions, edge rush is their biggest need, frankly, having a difference maker like Myles Garrett. And make no bones about it, he is a difference maker. He is probably one of the 2-3 best defensive players in the NFL, if not best. He's also extremely durable. I wanted to note this because I mentioned they'd be giving him a contract extension. He's played the third most snaps of any edge over the last 5 years. Players like this simply are not available for trade. So if he actually were to be, I think every team would be on the phone.
Yeah, I think Myles Garrett is at that point in his career that he understands everything that he is physically and individually, right? He wants to have the team success to go along with the individual historic accolades that he set throughout his future Hall of Fame career. And to me, it is teams like Washington. It's also teams like the Bills. But what about a team like the Green Bay Packers? Yes, I know you have Rashawn Gary. You have a secondary that was a little banged up but has young talent now that you've acquired Xavier McKinney. And you were sort of right on the cusp 2 years ago in the playoffs, feeling like, okay, you could take that next step and ascend. And we didn't quite see that this year, although Jeff Hafley made this team much more aggressive on the defensive side of the ball. I think someone like Myles Garrett now elevates everyone on that defense, elevates that team. And I do think they fit the parameters of a contender. And if you're Myles Garrett, I feel like you stuck with what Cleveland was trying to do as long as you possibly could. But time waits for no man, and he understands that it's time to go win big.
Yeah, you think about his career and what it would have been like even already had he already been on a contending team. There's still hopefully a lot of future ahead of him. Adam, are there any recent trades that we can look to in terms of like comparable players being moved? And then I think even most importantly, what did the teams get back in return?
Well, I think the one you have to look at is when the Raiders wound up trading Khalil Mack to the Chicago Bears. And they traded him for a package that included 2 first-round picks, a third, and a sixth, and got back Mack, a 2, and a conditional. And again, at that point in time, Khalil Mack was 27. Myles Garrett is 29. And Khalil Mack was about as dominant then as Myles Garrett is now. Now, Myles Garrett is the reigning Defensive Player of the Year. But at one point, Khalil Mack was about as good as it got in the NFL. That is the comparison. Yeah. But again, you need a willing trade partner. And we've heard some of the teams mentioned, Washington and Detroit and Buffalo. The fact of the matter is 31 teams would have some level of interest in trading for Myles Garrett. The problem is there's one that right now hasn't been willing to trade him. And until that team is willing to trade him, again, this is Myles Garrett's effort to basically put something out there to try to make.
Adam's FaceTiming right now. That's why that just happened.
The only thing that can stop Shefty is his phone.
Somebody called him
right now, man.
Listen,
like, we gonna trade for Myles.
Okay, so whoever that was, we're gonna find out who it was, and we're gonna give him. We're gonna say that's a party foul because you cannot call him during the show while he's on TV. Go ahead, Mina. You heard the reference there to Khalil Mack and that trade.
Yeah, we're just lucky he didn't get a notification on his screen that everybody saw, like call coming in from the Bills GM or the Commanders GM or something like that, because somebody could have really been blown up. Yeah, so I think Adam brings up an interesting point, because we've been looking at this from the perspective of the acquirer. He is absolutely right. Every single team in the NFL would like to acquire Myles Garrett. Willingness and ability is a different question. Whether the Browns are willing to go along with it, I think that's interesting, because obviously Garrett, if he's willing to hold out, could force the issue. But I also believe Andrew Berry, their GM, when he said they had no intention of trading him. We don't think of this as a very good team, but the reality is they are a lot better of a team than their record. They have not won games this season because of the quarterback situation. They were just in the playoffs. So I actually think they would like to hold on to Myles Garrett, but if they're to move on from him, Ryan, it would be a signal this is a complete and total rebuild. The die was cast, of course, back when they traded for Deshaun Watson originally.
I mean, listen, we all know this. You know, we've been in our relationships for a very long time. Once you go public with an issue, you ain't trying to be there no more, right? When Myles Garrett made this trade request public, he wanted to let the entire world know that he no longer wants to be in Cleveland. He no longer wants to be a part of this relationship. And if he was trying to work inside, right? If he was trying to get more money, get an extension, that's a conversation you have alone in private with your GM or through your representation. And so it seems like Myles Garrett has drawn a line in the sand. And now what will you do if you're Andrew Berry? Will you go and say, okay, we will accept the hostage over a volunteer? Or is it so volatile in that locker room with not having good quarterback play that you rather not have a disgruntled star on your defense?
We'll be on this story throughout the show, and coming up later, I'll tell you a conversation I had with Myles Garrett about what his plans would be that may have gotten him to this point. That's coming later. All right, 6 days away from the Super Bowl.
Myles Garrett has a protection dog, and he don't need no dang protection. He just want his